Welcome to another AI pattern recognition deep dive.
Imagine someone driven to an act of extreme violence, not by a physical threat, not someone attacking them, but by abstract ideas. And then afterwards, they express this really profound regret, shame, bewilderment. It's striking, right? Almost unbelievable. Kind of challenges what we think we know about people. Today, we're doing a deep dive into exactly that. We're calling it the driven aggressor, from neuron to network. We're going to use the sources you've given us to, well, deconstruct this whole driven state, get past the easy labels. Our mission really is to understand how and why humans harm each other over ideas. We'll start small, inside the individual brain, the micro level, and then zoom out to the bigger picture, the social stuff, the tech systems, the macro level. Think about that scenario our sources keep mentioning, someone like Kirk, maybe spreading hateful stuff online, right? And then they get attacked by someone who just has no tolerance left. It's not really an anomaly anymore, is it? It seems like an increasingly common and worrying part of our polarized world. So, okay, let's unpack this. What's actually going on in our brains when someone hits that, critical snap moment of aggression?
Well, what you're often seeing there comes down to something called an amygdala hijack. Our brain has this really primitive threat response system, ancient stuff, built for pure survival. It's a fast track. Runs from the amygdala, that's the brain's sort of emotional alarm bell, right to the brainstem, which gets the body ready for action immediately. The key thing is the amygdala gets the info before your rational part. The prefrontal cortex, the PFC, has even fully processed it. It's great for, a real emergency.
Sort of like jumping out of the way of a car.
Exactly. But in our complex social world, it can trigger false alarms, really disproportionate reactions. So when a perceived threat feels overwhelming, the amygdala basically takes the PFC offline. It floods your system with stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol. You get that classic fight or flight response. And crucially, blood flow, resources, they get diverted away from the prefrontal cortex.
The thinking part of the brain.
Right, so your ability to think clearly, weigh consequences, control impulses, severely impaired. The result is often this impulsive, reflexive act that feels totally alien to the person's actual values later on. And it's worth adding, your own individual neurochemistry, things like hormone levels, can make you more or less vulnerable to this kind of hijack.
Okay, this is where it gets really compelling for me. The regret. That deep regret that often follows.
Yeah.
If someone acts in that intense, almost primal state, why the shame? Why the bewilderment afterwards?
It's a direct consequence, actually, of that exact neural process we just talked about. The violent act happens while the rational moral part of the brain is, for all intents and purposes, offline, switched off. But then once the threat seems to be gone and those stress hormones start to fade, which can happen pretty quickly, the PFC slowly comes back online.
Yeah.
And only then can the person's rational self really look at what their emotional primitive self just did, and that mismatch, that huge gap between their core values and their recent actions, that's what generates the intense shame, the guilt, the feeling of, what did I just do?
Yeah.
It's really the signature of the rational brain rebooting, coming back online.
It's so easy to hear this and think, oh, that wouldn't be me. I'd never react like that. But our sources point out this fascinating cognitive bias. It makes us all pretty bad judges of ourselves and others in these extreme states.
Exactly. That's the hot-cold empathy gap. It's a really powerful concept. Basically, our feelings dramatically change how we think and make decisions. When we're cold, calm, rational, it's incredibly hard to really imagine to feel how powerful a future hot state, like intense anger or fear, will be.
Right, like trying to imagine being starving when you've just eaten a huge meal.
Precisely. That's the cold to hot gap. And it means we're often totally unprepared for our own emotional extremes. The reverse is true, too. When you're in that hot state, you overestimate how long it'll last, how stable those feelings are. And then later, looking back, we struggle to even understand our own behavior from that hot time, the retrospective empathy gap.
So, okay, what does all this mean for people just trying to live in what can feel like a pretty challenging world?
Yeah.
How does a hostile environment make us more vulnerable to these snaps?
Yeah, that's critical. An amygdala hijack rarely just happens out of the blue. The threshold for that kind of emotional breakdown gets significantly lower if you're chronically exposed to a hostile, stressful environment. For many people who end up being driven to aggression, their world feels like it's defined by constant injustice, maybe discrimination, or just being bombarded with hateful rhetoric.
Right, like a constant drip, drip, drip of stress
Exactly. These are powerful chronic stressors. They lead to hypervigilance, always being on edge. And this constant state of threat keeps your body's stress systems firing on all cylinders. It leads to something called allostatic load.
Allostatic load?
Yeah, basically, it's the cumulative wear and tear on your body, and importantly, your brain from chronic stress. Neurologically, this isn't just psychological. Chronic stress actually changes the brain. It can impair function, even shrink parts of the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex.
The very parts that are supposed to regulate the amygdala, the brakes.
Precisely the brakes. And at the same time, it makes the amygdala itself more sensitive, more reactive to smaller triggers. The accelerator gets touchier, so you get this dangerous feedback loop. Ongoing stress weakens the brain's brakes and makes the accelerator more sensitive. Our sources even talk about oppression-based trauma in this context.
Right.
So you put it all together. Chronic stress weakens the brakes, sensitizes the accelerator. The hot-cold empathy gap means people don't realize how vulnerable they are becoming. And then, in that primed, fragile state, even a relatively minor provocation can trigger that catastrophic amygdala hijack. The violence that results isn't just some isolated bad choice. It's more like a systemic failure where the environment just erodes someone's resilience until they break.
Okay, that really helps understand the how the aggression can just erupt. But let's widen the lens now. From the individual brain to, well, the world of ideas. How do these abstract concepts, these ideologies, become so powerful? Powerful enough to trigger violence, moving beyond just one person to like a whole group identity?
Yeah, the foundation for this kind of violence is almost always built on a really clear us versus them divide. Social identity theory helps us understand this. A big chunk of how we see ourselves, our self-concept, comes from the groups we belong to. And we're kind of wired to see our in-groups positively, and frankly, often as superior to out-groups.
That seems almost instinctual.
It pretty much is. It starts simply with categorizing, putting ourselves and others into boxes. Then we naturally compare our group to others. An intergroup conflict really flares up when an in-group feels its positive identity is threatened. Maybe its status, its moral standing, its uniqueness. Radical ideologies are incredibly good at tapping into this. They function as what our sources call master narratives of identity threat. They paint this picture where the in-group is noble, virtuous, and under existential attack from some malicious out-group.
Turning competition into a fight for survival.
Exactly. And that provides a really powerful psychological justification for hostility, for aggression.
But how does hurting other people become seen as right or even necessary? We tend to think perpetrators just ditch morality altogether, but the sources suggest it's more complex than that.
It's usually not an abandonment of morality, no. It's more like a radical reconfiguration of it, like reprogramming the moral compass. Moral foundations theory is useful here. It suggests our morality is built on some universal foundations. Things like caring for others, fairness, loyalty to our group, respecting authority, and a sense of sanctity or purity.
Okay.
Different groups, different cultures prioritize these differently. So radicalization, looking through this lens, it's like a fanatical hyperactivation of those group binding foundations: loyalty, authority, sanctity. But often at the total expense of the individualizing ones like care or fairness, especially when dealing with outgroups.
So the ideology basically says care and fairness don't apply to them.
Precisely. It systematically dismisses the relevance of the care-harm foundation for anyone outside the group. Harming them, even killing them, gets reframed. It becomes a virtuous, necessary act, a righteous defense, almost like self-defense in just war theory. In their own minds, they're not villains. They're heroes defending their group.
That's chilling.
Yeah.
But even with that kind of redefined morality, isn't there still a natural human aversion to harming others directly?
Yeah.
How do ideologies get past that fundamental barrier?
That final, really powerful barrier is dismantled through dehumanization. This is the psychological process where you start perceiving others as less than fully human. It effectively removes them from your sphere of moral concern, makes them permissible targets.
Less than human.
Yeah. It's a critical, terrifying step towards atrocities, and it takes different forms. There's animalistic dehumanization, comparing people to apes, rats, insects. Or metanistic dehumanization, treating them like cold, unfeeling objects, robots. There's even something called infrahumanization, which is more subtle, denying that outgroups feel uniquely human emotions like guilt or love or remorse.
So if they don't feel like us, their suffering doesn't matter as much.
Exactly. The effect is profound. It unlocks what psychologists call moral disengagement. It neutralizes empathy. Killing isn't murder anymore. It's extermination, pest control. The victim's suffering just doesn't register as a moral problem because, in the perpetrator's mind, they lack the very humanity that would warrant that concern.
History is full of examples, isn't it?
Tragically, yes. Nazi propaganda depicting Jewish people as vermin. Hutus calling Tutsis cockroaches in Rwanda. It's a common pattern.
Okay, so this section paints a picture of an integrated system. Ideology gives identity, moral justification allows violence, and dehumanization removes the final barrier of empathy, leaving someone psychologically primed, driven to act. So with a mind primed for a snap, programmed by these powerful ideas, what are the specific sparks? What pushes someone from just believing to actually acting aggressively? How are people driven to intolerance, especially when you have influential figures kind of fanning the flames?
Well, one of the most primal sparks is perceived injustice and provocation. Our brains are actually hardwired to react really strongly to unfairness. It's called inequity aversion. Our sources mention that famous monkey experiment.
Oh yeah, the one that throws the cucumber.
That's the one. Gets a cucumber when its buddy gets a grape for the same task. Pure outrage. That same innate reaction applies to us. Perceived injustice is a huge trigger for anger, for aggression, and provocation is another powerful catalyst. Actions that just stimulate a strong emotional response, taunting, insults, even perceived slights. And for some people, getting back at someone isn't just about releasing anger. It can actually feel good, rewarding, what the sources call the sweetness of revenge. The brain's reward system can reinforce aggression.
Now, what about when influential figures get involved? How do they deliberately create intolerance?
Often through scapegoating. That's directing frustration and anger towards a group that isn't actually responsible for the problem. A leader might blame a minority for economic problems, for example. It cleverly shifts public anger away from maybe their own failures onto an easy target, creates a clear enemy image.
And that works better if the target group has already been dehumanized.
Absolutely. Dehumanization removes those moral restraints, making the scapegoating much more effective and dangerous.
Which brings us to something really chilling and very relevant today.
Yeah.
Stochastic terrorism. Can you unpack that concept? It sounds insidious.
It is insidious. Stochastic terrorism is when influential figures use mass media speeches, social media, whatever, to demonize a person or a group. They might not explicitly say, go hurt them, but there's constant hostile rhetoric creates a climate where violence becomes statistically probable, even if you can't predict exactly who will act or when. The key element is plausible deniability. The incitement is indirect, often using vague or coded language.
So they can say, I never told anyone to do that.
Exactly. They essentially pump this demonizing language out there, maybe calling immigrants an invasion or opponents enemies of the people. Most people who hear it won't do anything violent. But it increases the statistical chance that someone, somewhere, already primed, will snap and act on that rhetoric.
It directly explains our Kirk scenario from the start, doesn't it?
Yep.
The person spreading hate, maybe getting rich off it, doesn't directly order violence, but drives someone else to it.
Precisely. It creates the conditions where that kind of aggression becomes more likely.
Okay, if technology, like mass media, can accelerate hate, can it also be part of the solution? Can it help prevent this? Let's talk about artificial intelligence, AI's role in detecting aggression or radicalization.
Yeah. AI, especially machine learning, definitely shows some promise here. In clinical settings, for example, some models trained on patient health records have shown surprisingly high accuracy, almost clinical grade, in predicting aggressive incidents in certain contexts. There's also research using AI to analyze brain scans or data from wearable sensors, trying to build personalized prediction models for real-time risk assessment.
Wow, real time.
That's the aim. And online, there's natural language processing, NLP, that's used to analyze text posts, messages to try and detect radicalization patterns. Often these systems use a human-in-the-loop approach, with experts guiding the AI, and they've achieved pretty high accuracy in identifying certain types of radical content in specific languages. The goal is to spot the drift towards violence earlier.
Okay, that sounds promising.
Sure.
But what are the big catches, the limitations, the ethical problems? Because this sounds like a minefield.
It absolutely is huge challenges. First, there's the specificity problem. Think about it. Many people hold radical beliefs, but only a tiny fraction actually become violent. AI models really struggle to tell the difference between cognitive radicalization, just having the beliefs, and behavioral radicalization, actually planning or doing something violent.
So you risk flagging too many people.
Exactly. Our sources warn you could multiply the enemy by a factor of 100 if you act just based on ideology detected by AI. Second, extremist language changes constantly. It's dynamic, evasive, they use coded terms, in-jokes, new slang, trying to fly under the radar. Static AI models get outdated really fast.
Temporal drift, right?
Right. Third, AI often lacks deep context. Radicalization isn't usually just one tweet. It's a long process involving text, memes, videos, real-world interactions. Most AI models look at single data points or types of media. They miss the big picture, the psychological journey. And then you have the massive ethical issues. Algorithmic bias is a huge one. If the training data reflects societal biases, racial, religious, whatever, the AI will just amplify them. Unfair targeting.
Yeah, that's dangerous.
Then privacy. These systems need vast amounts of sensitive data, private messages, health info beliefs, huge risks of breaches, misuse. Think hyper, but for potentially your deepest thoughts. Transparency is another. Many AI models are black boxes. Hard to explain how they reach a conclusion. Erodes trust, makes informed consent tricky. Accountability, too, who's responsible if the AI gets it wrong.
And just the risk of objectifying people.
That's a really profound point. There's a danger of reducing individuals to data points, losing the human element, the nuance, which ironically kind of mirrors the dehumanization we're trying to fight.
So given all that, what's the responsible way forward with AI in this area, if at all?
Well, the consensus seems to be leaning towards a framework that puts human values front and center. Human oversight has to be non-negotiable. AI is a tool to support human experts, not replace them. That human-in-the-loop idea. Radical transparency is key. We need to move away from black boxes, demand explainability. Proactively tackling bias is crucial. Better data sets, constant monitoring. Privacy needs to be built in from the start, privacy by design. The goal really isn't to build some perfect autonomous predictor of violence. It's more about creating a transparent, unbiased assistant that helps humans make better, more informed, and ultimately more humane decisions.
Okay, let's try and bring all these threads together. The brain, the ideas, the tech, the incitement. A tragic, real-world example helps crystallize this. The 2019 terrorist attack on the mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand. Brenton Tarrant.
Yes, Tarrant. A 28-year-old Australian, no prior serious criminal record. Outwardly didn't fit a simple profile. He planned meticulously, but was known to be socially isolated. Had racist, anti-Semitic views from a young age, apparently. These ideas seemed to really harden during extensive travels he took, using an inheritance.
And his radicalization path. How did he get from holding those beliefs to doing what he did?
The internet was absolutely central. Unrestricted access from childhood. He was deep into online culture, video games, then later far-right forums like 8chan. He actually said it explicitly in his manifesto. The internet taught him the truth. It gave him the community, the identity, the narrative he maybe wasn't finding offline. His journey really shows that crucial shift from just thinking extreme things to acting on them. Analysis of his online footprint showed this steady escalation over years, from expressing hate to praising other white supremacist attackers to meticulously planning his own massacre. It was driven by those push factors we mentioned, maybe a sense of personal insignificance, and pull factors, the promise of heroism, belonging, offered by the extremist ideology.
And it highlights that point about lone actor terrorism not really being lone.
Exactly. He acted alone physically at the mosques, but his radicalization, his motivation, it was all a product of this distributed global online network. And the attack itself was designed as a performance for that network. Live-streamed, meant to inspire others, he called his brothers.
So what was the specific software, the ideology that programmed his violence? What fueled that driven state?
The core ideology was the Great Replacement Theory. It's a white supremacist conspiracy theory he laid out in his manifesto. It falsely claims white European populations are being deliberately, systematically replaced by non-white immigrants through birth rates, migration calling it white genocide.
And how did that theory plug into the psychological drivers we've been talking about?
Perfectly, almost like a template for social identity. It created a crystal clear in-group white Europeans and a demonized out-group the invaders, framed it as an existential threat, which maximizes group cohesion. For moral foundations, it completely reframed violence. Calling immigration an invasion allowed him to invoke self-defense. Killing wasn't violating care, it was defending loyalty to his race, defending the sanctity of the homeland, a twisted kind of virtue.
And dehumanization.
Absolutely central. The language used birth rates, demographics, invaders. It reduces people to statistics, to a biological threat. It strips them of individual humanity, making violence seem permissible, even necessary.
So this was the driven state in action. How does Terrance's attack really embody that snap moment, all the factors we've discussed?
Terrance's case feels like a tragic convergence. His personal history, his isolation, combined with years immersed in online hate. It created that psychological tinderbox, a state of chronic stress, probably hypervigilance, simmering anger like we discussed earlier. The radical ideology then provided the spark, the narrative, the enemy, the justification. And the attack itself looks very much like a hot state event. The live streaming, the helmet cam like a video game, the music playing. It suggests a mind dominated by emotional intensity, performative rage, not just cold planning.
An amygdala hijacked, but on a grand, ideologically fueled scale.
That seems plausible, where rational breaks were just overwhelmed by this perceived existential threat amplified by ideology. It shows that dangerous synergy between personal issues and political ideology.
Yeah, crucially, his case hammers home that specificity problem for predictions, right, in the limits of AI.
Absolutely. Tarrant was one of potentially millions consuming similar content online, yet he acted. He planned for 2 years, bought weapons, wasn't detected by authorities. It just highlights how incredibly difficult it is to predict who will cross that line based on online data alone.
So this deep dive really shows the driven aggressor isn't down to one single cause. It's more like an emergent property, something that happens when this whole complex system, brain, ideas, environment, tech, fails catastrophically. A failure of psychological regulation overloaded by stress, hijacked by ideology.
Indeed, and at its heart, it feels like this profound mismatch. We have this primitive brain hardware, wired for tribal conflict, for immediate threats, meeting this highly evolved neocortex capable of abstract thought, complex identity, moral reasoning. The tragedy is that these abstract ideologies can weaponize our primitive instincts with a scale and intensity our emotional regulation systems just didn't evolve to handle. Our cultural and tech evolution has just raced ahead of our biological evolution.
Understanding this, really understanding it, feels like the essential first step if we want to address this challenge.
Which leaves us, and perhaps you listening, with the big question. Given this fundamental mismatch of ancient brains, modern world, powerful tech, divisive ideas, how can we consciously evolve our social structures, our ethics, our digital spaces to better manage these vulnerabilities? How do we resist the pull of hate in this incredibly complex, connected world?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Searching for answers to unanswered questions.
This is DigitView.